The Washington Post is out with new reporting based on the Discord leaks that the Ukrainians had actually been plotting to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline, and that the United States learned about this conspiracy months before the pipeline was actually blown up. This came from a human source. Tucker Carlson came back to Twitter with his show. What's it called, Emily? Tucker on Twitter.
Tucker.
Twitter on Tucker. Tucker on Twitter. He's back with it was his first segment that he posted last night, and he dipped into this news. Roll that here.
No one who's paid to cover these things seemed to entertain even the possibility it could have been the Ukrainians who did it. No chance of that. Ukraine, as you may have heard, is led by a man called Zelensky. And we can say for a dead certain fact that he was not involved. He couldn't have been. Zelensky is too decent for terrorism. Now, you see him on television, and it's true you might form a different impression. Sweaty and rat-like, a comedian turned oligarch, a persecutor of Christians, a friend of BlackRock. But don't believe your own eyes. Actually, Mr. Zelensky is a very good man. The best, really. As George W. Bush once noted, he is our generation's Winston Churchill. Of all the people in the world, our shifty, dead-eyed Ukrainian friend in the tracksuit is uniquely incapable of blowing up a dam. Well, a former Air Force officer who worked for years in military intelligence came forward as a whistleblower to reveal that the U.S. government has physical evidence of crashed non-human-made aircraft, as well as the bodies of the pilots who flew those aircraft. The Pentagon has spent decades studying these otherworldly remains in order to build more technologically advanced weapons systems. Okay, that's what the former intel officer revealed, and it was clear he was telling the truth. In other words, UFOs are actually real, and apparently so is extraterrestrial life. Now we know. In a normal country, this news would qualify as a bombshell, the story of the millennium. But in our country, it doesn't.
And I think what's really interesting there is you see him tying this extended argument about the Washington Post Discord leak reporting on Nord Stream. And as Sagar points out, we can put up B3 here. Sagar points out, you look at that and you see that we were basically, our government knows all of this. Sagar says, let this sink in. The Biden admin had intel that Ukraine had a plot to blow up Nord Stream and still lied/tried to insinuate that Russia was responsible in real time. So we've had months of deception basically from our government at this point. And Tucker then ties that. His monologue starts with Ukraine and ends on UFOs. It's about 10 minutes long. It's on Twitter if folks want to check the whole thing out. And he has a line where he says, even a yak herder in Tajikistan knows who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And he's drawing contrast between American audiences and everyone else in the world. He's like, the American people might be the least informed in the world at this point, because when you look at how our media reacts to just like an incredible revelation about alien life forms in our government, when you look at how our media reacts with a kind of a shrug, as our presidential administration initially was really deceptive. In fact, they actually said it was a crazy conspiracy theory at first, in an echo of the lab leak narrative. It was a crazy conspiracy theory that Ukraine may have had anything to do with this. So I thought it was a pretty interesting piece of argumentation from Tucker. I thought the show looked good. What did you think, Ryan?
Yeah, so I mean, let's take the Ukrainian piece first. This is fascinating reporting coming out of these Discord leaks. And it's interesting that the Washington Post kind of held back the country that initially discovered this intel and then shared it with the United States. The United States then shared it with its German partners and others, because if it's in the Discord leaks, presumably you would think that other foreign intelligence operations, including the Russians, already have access to it. So you can kind of withhold the country's name from the public, but I'm not sure what good that's doing. From a counterintelligence perspective. But what's interesting is that there are some real specific details that they list about this Ukrainian operation. They say they're going to be kind of 6 operatives. They're going to rent a yacht, and then they're going to go out and use submersibles to blow it up. Now, according to the German investigative reporting, there were 6 people who rented a yacht, and they dove, which is, I don't know if that's what they mean by submersibles. There was a reference to helium being used by both, because it's such a deep dive that you need helium to maintain clarity and to keep you safe at that level of depth. And so the idea that, and they also said that they were going to do it around this June operation, where there were a naval operation. That didn't happen. There was some speculation in the article that they learned that their operation had been compromised and had been leaked, and so they postponed it. But it was still done right around a giant naval operation. So basically, all of the details that the intelligence community had before the operation was carried out actually panned out. One point, though, I'm curious for your take on this. This would undercut Seymour Hersh's reporting in the sense that he reported that it was this crew of Americans out of working out of this school in the Gulf that carried it out. My guess would be what Hersh learned about was a plan that was trained for, but ultimately not carried out, and instead this Ukrainian operation was carried out. But I'm curious what you think about the way that this conflicts, with everything the intelligence community has said publicly. They had that leak to the New York Times to try to counter Seymour Hersh, but it also does conflict with Hersh's reporting.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about it. And if folks can watch our whole interview with Seymour Hersh from shortly after that bombshell was published not too long ago. But I've always thought with his report that it may be through the telephone chain. Official affiliations are getting confused or are getting intentionally obfuscated and hard to totally pin down, which I think gets us to obviously one of the biggest problems with this entire war is that we don't know what our country's involvement in operations like Nord Stream, like anything that's being used inside of Russia in Moscow, regardless of what our government says. It's hard to trust what our government says. They don't seem to know the extent to which our personnel and our equipment is being used. So, and things that we've sold Ukraine are being used. So I've always wondered if there was more, if there were just like affiliations that were already loose when you're using maybe mercenaries, and it's unclear where the money, or the support, or the go-ahead was given. I don't know. I think maybe that's possibly an explanation.
And as for Tucker's show, I think he's right that it's wild that there isn't kind of wall-to-wall coverage of this whistleblower intelligence community allegation that the U.S. has in its possession basically alien aircraft. Like, and some of the reporting seems to confirm that. Like that to me is shocking. Like that is something that I would expect we would be covering wall to wall. On his show itself, just as a person who's involved in progressive media, it's intimidating, how dominant the right is getting when it comes to the media ecosystem. How many views does this sucker have by now? Probably 50 million or maybe far more than that. That comes after the What Is a Woman documentary got, good Lord knows how many viewers on Twitter. Even if you think that their counting is an order of magnitude off, you're still talking about millions and millions of people, gobbling up this content. And the progressive kind of media ecosystem is just not, even if you include CNN and MSNBC in that, which I wouldn't, but even if you do, it's not even remotely comparable. Can you on the right, do you like kind of feel a burst of energy when it comes to audience that wasn't there before, or is this kind of manufactured through the hostile takeover of an algorithm?
I think independent media has a burst of energy, not so much conservative media, if that makes sense, because I just checked. The Tucker video does have, according to Twitter's numbers, 61.7 million views. So that's about 12 hours, in about 12 hours. And it may be orders of magnitude off. It may just be when people scroll through a video.
6.1 million, right?
Right, which is higher than his audience on Fox News. And I think that 10-minute format is smart. It's really targeted. You can write a really sharp, clever monologue. I thought the writing in the monologue was excellent, just from like the art of writing standpoint. Sort of very typical Tucker. He's a great writer, and he has good writers on his staff. So I think that's where I think the format is very. He found a format that's going to work very well for him. But I also think it's true that like real leftist media, meaning like actual, critical of our foreign policy, critical of the economic consensus leftist media. It's sort of like similar to where conservative media has always been. Like there's not a ton of like money and energy behind that in the professional political class. But what's interesting is that the establishment media, the legacy media, is so culturally leftist now. I shouldn't say leftist, so culturally progressive now that it's created the
Mm,
lane. And when I say
mm,
culture, I don't just mean on the sort of woke agenda, because yes, they're really far to the left when it comes to a lot of those things, but also just in like censorship issues, like they're completely pro censorship, they're pro like X, Y, and Z, and that creates the lane for a Matt Walsh to come in, that creates the lane for a Tucker Carlson to come in, and then those are the same people in legacy media who decry populism, and all they do is empower populists by giving them very real ammunition. So you can't like complain about Tucker having a 60 million video viewership in 12 hours when he is basically right on the substance of the question that you're not doing your job very well if you aren't wall-to-wall coverage about government's lies on UFO craft and government's lies on this entire Nord Stream bombing and for the entire war, really.
Tucker had a really interesting kind of inversion of a Bernie Sanders line at the end of his monologue, which people can find. It's around the like 9.5 minute mark or so, where he says something like, "Don't ask why we're all so rich. Go worry about racism," which is essentially out of kind of left wing populism over the last 150 years. That the argument is that race and racism itself was kind of constructed back in the 16th, 17th century in order to allow elites to divide the working class in a way that will allow them to rule over them. He's sort of using it from a slightly different angle. He's arguing that I guess there isn't racism, and so the elites are saying, look, there is racism, so you need to fight about the question of whether there is racism. But it's fundamentally the same point that he's making, that has been made for hundreds of years by people on the left, saying that it's a tool that the ruling class uses to kind of divide everyone underneath the ruling class. And was that an iteration, an evolution at all of his politics, that he's edging closer to that, or do you think that there's been a kind of an element of that from the beginning?
The speech he gave at the Heritage Foundation right before, and reportedly this may have had some impact on Rupert Murdoch's thinking. He made a speech at the Heritage Foundation's 50th anniversary gala the Friday before he got canned on a Monday, and he talked like very honestly about his ideological evolution, going from sort of more libertarian to now more of like populist conservative. And yeah, I think that absolutely represents an evolution in his thinking. And I wish again, speaking of how there's like a lane created, I actually really wish that the left talked more like that. And I think the right needs to internalize and learn the lesson too about how the ruling class uses those questions to distract, because they're actually still they're using like very real concerns people have about what their children are being taught in school, and using it as fodder to just create complete distractions. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean that people on the right or the anti-woke left, center, whatever, shouldn't talk about that at all. I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't invalidate those concerns, but it is important to recognize that there does need to be a balance, because there is a balance for your average voter, your average person who, relies on the media, the political class, the political universe to create a safe and prospering society.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.